The great hall of the Pinnacle Station stretched wide like the mouth of some sleeping giant. Lights floated in the air, casting blue and gold shadows on the curved walls. 12 seats formed a circle at the center, each one carved from stone brought from distant worlds. 11 of those seats held the representatives of the elder species beings who had sailed between stars when humanity still lived in caves. The 12th seat sat empty. It was smaller than the others. It had no carvings. It was made of simple metal, and it did not face the center like the rest. It faced the wall, like a child forced to sit in the corner. That seat belonged to humanity. Una Park stood behind that empty chair, her hands folded, her face calm. She wore the gray uniform of the human diplomatic corps. Her black hair was pulled back tight. She had stood in this same spot for 6 years, watching, listening, saying nothing unless asked. Today, the council was voting on humanity's request for a real seat. A seat, the center. A seat with voting power. It was the 7th time humanity had made this request. The Velthari representative spoke first. His name was Counselor Veth, and his species had ruled this region of space for 10,000 years. His skin was pale blue, and his eyes had no pupils, just endless white. When he spoke, his voice echoed like stones dropping into deep water. The humans are young, Veth said. They joined us only 40 years ago. They are emotional. They are reckless. They have not earned the right to vote on matters that shape the galaxy. Una did not blink. She had heard these words before. She would hear them again. The Morathi representative nodded. The Excellian representative tapped his claws in agreement. One by one, the elder species voted against humanity. 11 votes. 11 refusals. Una bowed her head slightly, the way she had been trained. The human delegation thanks the council for its consideration, she said. Her voice was steady. Her heart was not. She turned and walked out of the great hall. Her boots made no sound on the polished floor. Outside, Lieutenant Taiho Kim waited for her. He was younger than Una, with kind eyes and quick hands that were always holding a data pad. He fell into step beside her as she walked. Same result? He asked quietly. Same result, Una replied. They walked through the winding corridors of Pinnacle Station. The walls hummed with power. The air recyclers breathed softly above them. Somewhere in the distance, a repair drone clicked and whirred as it fixed a broken light panel. Taiho glanced at his datapad. I finished the report you asked for, and 73% of all emergency response teams in the galaxy are led by humans. 89% of translation infrastructure is maintained by human engineers. 61% of medical emergency interventions in the past decade involved human doctors or human technology. He paused. We also maintain the jump gates. All of them. The elder species forgot how they worked centuries ago. Una stopped walking. She looked at a window that showed the stars outside, countless points of light scattered across the black. We do everything, she said softly, and they give us nothing. They don't even see it, Taiho said. To them, we're just ... helpers. Assistants. The species that cleans up and fixes things. Una was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to him. Send a message to Earth. Priority channel. Tell Admiral Han that I recommend Protocol Horizon. Taiho's eyes widened. Are you sure? I'm sure. Far away, on the blue and green world called Earth, Admiral Ji Wuhan sat in her office overlooking the sea. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face that had seen too many battles and too many betrayals. When the message arrived, she read it 3 times. Protocol Horizon. The plan that humanity had been building in secret for 20 years. The plan that no alien species knew about. The plan that would change everything. Ji Wu stood and walked to her window. Outside, ships floated above the water, human ships built with human hands, powered by human minds. For 40 years, humanity had served the galaxy. They had healed the sick. They had translated languages. They had maintained machines that the elder species had forgotten how to fix. They had negotiated peace between enemies who had fought for centuries, and in return, humanity had received a metal chair that faced the wall. Ji Wu pressed a button on her desk. A hologram appeared, a young officer with a serious face. "Admiral," the officer said. "Begin protocol horizon," Jiwoo said. Silent withdrawal. 6 months. No announcements. No warnings. No demands. The officer hesitated. "Admiral, once we start, there's no going back." "I know." Jiwoo looked out at the sea, at the waves that had crashed against these shores for millions of years. They will not notice at first. They never notice what we do. But one day, they will wake up and realize that everything is broken. And they will finally understand what they lost. She turned back to the hologram. "Send the orders." On Pinnacle Station, life continued as normal. The Velthari held their ceremonies. The Morvathi conducted their trade. The Excellients debated philosophy in their clicking language that only humans had learned to translate. No. One noticed when a human engineer quietly removed her tools from a maintenance closet and walked to the shuttle bay. No one noticed. When a human doctor finished her last surgery and said goodbye to her alien colleagues with a small, sad smile, no one noticed when the human staff in the translation bureau began to pack their personal belongings into small boxes. Una Park stood at the window of her quarters, looking at the stars one last time. She had given 6 years of her life to this station. She had believed, once, that if humans worked hard enough, served long enough, proved themselves again and again, the elder species would finally accept them as equals. She did not believe that anymore. She picked up her bag and walked to the door. Before she left, she paused and looked back at the small room that had been her home. "Goodbye," she whispered. She did not say it to the room. She said it to the dream of belonging that she was leaving behind in the Great Hall. Counselor Veth was reviewing reports from his homeworld. He did not look up as a human aide walked past him for the last time. He did not know that everything was about to change. He did not know that the galaxy was about to learn, in the hardest way possible, what happened when the quiet ones finally stopped giving. The humans were leaving, and they were not going to say goodbye. The withdrawal began like a whisper. No alarms, no protests. No angry speeches or dramatic exits. Just small, quiet changes that no one seemed to notice. Dr. Mingi Cho had worked in the Translation Bureau for 15 years. She knew every line of code in the universal translators, the small devices that allowed hundreds of species to understand each other. What the elder species did not know was that those devices had stopped working properly decades ago. The original alien technology could barely handle 12 languages. It was human programmers who had patched the system, who had written new code in the middle of the night, who had fixed problems that the alien engineers could not even identify. Minji had done this work without thanks, without payment, without recognition. Now she was undoing it. She sat at her workstation, her fingers moving across the holographic keyboard. On her screen, lines of code scrolled past, code that she had written, code that she understood better than anyone in the galaxy. "Removing patch 774, she said quietly to herself. "Removing patch 7-7-5. A young Velthari technician walked past her station. "Working late again, Dr. Cho?" Mingi smiled. "Just doing some routine maintenance." The technician nodded and kept walking. He did not ask what kind of maintenance. He had never asked. None of them ever asked. By morning, Minji was gone. Her workstation was clean. Her personal items had disappeared. She left behind only the original translation system, the broken one that the elder species had built long ago, across the galaxy. Similar scenes played out in silence. Commander Junho Beek stood before Jump Gate 7, the largest and oldest gate in the network. It was a ring of ancient metal floating in space, wide enough for 100 ships to pass through at once. The elder species had built it 3,000 years ago, and they had forgotten how it worked 2,000 years ago. Humans had kept it running ever since. Junho had spent 20 years studying these gates. He knew their secrets. He knew which parts needed replacing every decade, which power fluctuations meant danger, which strange sounds were normal and which meant disaster. He had written all of this down in detailed manuals. Every procedure, every warning, every solution. The manuals were written in Korean. None of the elder species had ever learned Korean. They had never asked to learn. They had assumed that humans would always be there to translate, to explain. To fix things when they broke, JUNHO placed the manuals in a sealed container and left them in the maintenance room. Then he boarded his shuttle and flew away. Behind him, Jump Gate 7 continued to hum. For now, on the medical station orbiting the Morvathi homeworld, Dr. Hannah Shin finished her final surgery. Her patient was a young Morvathi child who had been born with a defective heart. Hannah had spent 6 hours replacing the damaged tissue with artificial materials that human scientists had invented. The child would live. The child would grow up healthy and strong. The child would never know that a human had saved her life. Hannah washed her hands slowly, watching the water run over her fingers. She had saved thousands of lives in this place. She had trained dozens of alien doctors. She had worked through nights and weekends and holidays because that was what humans did. They helped. They served. They gave, and no one had ever thanked her. A Morvathi nurse entered the room. Dr. Shin, we have another emergency incoming. A transport accident near the outer colonies. Hannah dried her hands. I'm sorry. My rotation has ended. I'm returning to Earth. The nurse blinked in confusion. But who will handle the emergency? Your doctors will handle it, Hannah said. They are capable. They just need to remember how. Oh. She walked out of the medical station without looking back. On Pinnacle Station, the human population shrank, day by day. Engineers finished their final repairs and left. Translators completed their final shifts and disappeared. Diplomats attended their final meetings and quietly slipped away. No one announced their departures. No one made speeches. When aliens asked where the humans had gone, other humans simply said they had been transferred, or they had taken leave, or they had personal matters to attend to. It was all very polite, very quiet, very human. YUNA Park was one of the last to leave. She had stayed to make sure everything went smoothly, to answer questions, to maintain the appearance of normalcy. On her final day, she stood before the Galactic Council one last time. She delivered a routine report about minor administrative matters, trade agreements, cultural exchanges. Nothing important. COUNCILLOR. Veth barely looked at her. He was studying something on his datapad, something far more interesting than a human diplomat talking about paperwork. Thank you for your report, Veth said without looking up. You may go. Yuna bowed. Thank you, counselor. She walked out of the Great Hall. She walked through the corridors she had walked for 6 years. She passed the maintenance closets where human engineers had worked through the night. She passed the medical bays where human doctors had saved countless lives. She passed the translation booths, where human linguists had built bridges between species who would never have understood each other otherwise. All of it was empty now. At the shuttle bay, Taiho Kim waited for her. He was the very last human on Pinnacle Station. Ready? He asked. Yuna looked back one final time. The great station floated in space, lights glittering like jewels. It was beautiful. It was magnificent. And soon, it would begin to fall apart. Ready? She said. They boarded the shuttle. The doors closed. The engines fired. 6 hours later, every human in the galaxy had crossed back into Sol System. The borders closed. Communication channels went silent. The great network of human outposts and stations and ships pulled back like a tide retreating from the shore. On Pinnacle Station, no one noticed. The Velthari held their evening ceremonies. The Morvathe reviewed their trade reports. The Excellians debated the nature of existence in their clicking language. 3 weeks passed. Then, one morning, a Morvathi diplomat tried to speak with an Excellian merchant. He pressed the button on his universal translator and spoke his greeting. The device made a strange sound, a garbled, broken noise that meant nothing. The merchant responded in his own language. More garbled noise. They stared at each other in confusion. Across the station, in a dozen different locations, the same thing was happening. Species who had spoken to each other for centuries suddenly could not understand a single word. In the maintenance bay, a Velthari engineer stared at a broken power conduit. He had no idea how to fix it. He looked for the human engineers who always knew what to do. They were gone in the medical wing. An alien doctor faced a dying patient. He needed diagnostic software that humans had installed decades ago. The software required a password. The password was in Korean. The doctor did not speak Korean. The patient died slowly, like a great beast realizing it had been wounded. Pinnacle Station began to understand what had happened. The lights flickered. The air recyclers groaned. The translation systems failed, and somewhere far away, in a garden on Earth, Admiral Ji Wuhan looked up at the stars and smiled. Now, she whispered, they will learn. The first crisis came 3 days after the translators failed. The Morvathi delegation had been negotiating a major trade agreement with the Excellians for months. Millions of credits were at stake. Entire economies depended on the outcome. The final meeting was scheduled for that morning, when the Morvathi ambassador spoke. The Excellian translator produced a sound like breaking glass. When the Excellian merchant replied, the Morvathi heard only silence. They tried different translators. They tried rebooting the systems. They called for technicians. The technicians came. They were Velthari skilled engineers who had been building machines for 10,000 years. They opened the translator devices and looked inside. They had no idea what they were seeing. The original translation technology was there.
Yes.
But layered on top of it were circuits and programs that no Velthari had ever installed. Notes were written in strange symbols. Diagrams used measurements that no alien species recognized. What is this? One technician asked. Human work, another replied quietly. They modified everything. Can you undo it? Can you fix it? The technician stared at the mess of alien and human technology woven together like threads in a cloth. I don't know where their work ends and ours begins. The trade negotiation collapsed. The Morvathi blamed the Excellians. The Excellians blamed the Morvathi. Within a week, 2 species that had been friends for centuries were threatening war. On Pinnacle Station, Counselor Veth called an emergency meeting. Where are the humans? He demanded. Bring me the human translators. Bring me the human engineers. We need them to fix this. His aide, a young Velthari named Torvin, shifted nervously. Counselor, the humans are gone. What do you mean gone? They left, Counselor. All of them. Weeks ago, Beth stared at him. In 10,000 years of Velthari history, no species had ever simply left. Departures were announced. Negotiations were held. There were ceremonies and formal farewells. It's impossible, Veth said. Check again. Torvin checked again. He checked the human quarters empty. He checked the human workstations cleaned out. He checked the human ships all gone. He checked the human embassy, sealed and dark. They're gone, Counselor, he said. Every single one. Veth sent a message to Earth. The message traveled across space, bounced between relay stations, and arrived at the edge of Sol System. It was not answered. He sent another message. And another Sol System remained silent. Meanwhile, the galaxy continued to fall apart. Jump Gate 7 failed on a Tuesday. 3 colony ships were traveling through it when the power suddenly cut out. The ships emerged in the wrong location, deep space, far from any star. With limited fuel and no way to call for help, a rescue mission was launched. The rescuers reached the Jump Gate network and found a maintenance room filled with manuals and diagrams. Every page was written in a language no one could read. What language is this? The rescue commander asked. Korean officer replied. It's a human language. We don't have any translators for it. Find someone who speaks it. Counselor, there is no one. The humans spoke our languages. We never learned theirs. The rescue mission failed. The colony ships drifted in darkness for 3 months before another gate could be repaired. When rescuers finally reached them, one ship had run out of air. 400 passengers had died. On the Velthari homeworld, a plague began to spread. It was a new disease, something that had mutated from an old virus. Velthari doctors studied it carefully. They were intelligent beings who had practiced medicine for millennia, but they had not practiced much in recent centuries. For the past 200 years, human medical teams had handled most emergencies. Human doctors had developed the treatments. Human scientists had created the vaccines. Velthari doctors had become administrators signing paperwork, attending meetings, overseeing budgets. They had forgotten how to heal. The plague spread from city to city. Hospitals filled with the sick. Doctors stood helplessly by beds consulting ancient textbooks that offered no solutions. "Call the humans," a dying patient begged. "The humans always know what to do." But the humans were gone. On Pinnacle Station, the lights began to flicker. Torvin, the young Velthari aide, spent his nights in the maintenance archives. He was one of the few who had worked alongside humans, who had watched them and learned from them. He pulled up the maintenance logs from the past 50 years. Every repair bore a human name. Unipark had fixed the climate control system 17 times. Junhobik had rebuilt the power grid twice. Minjicho had rewritten the entire communication network. Humans had touched every system, every machine, every circuit on the station. They had fixed problems that no one else noticed. They had prevented disasters that no one else could predict, and they had done it all without asking for credit. Torvin found a personal log left behind by a human engineer named Doan Kong. The log was written. In broken Velthar, Doan had been learning the language in his spare time. Today, I fixed the air system in Section 12, the log read. Counselor Veth walked past me while I work. He does not look at me. He does not know my name. I have been fixing this station for 10 years. I will fix it for 10 more. This is what humans do. We help, even when no one sees. Torvin closed the log. His hands were shaking. He went to Counselor V's office. The counselor was staring at reports of failing systems. Collapsing trade routes, dying citizens, Counselor Torvin said. I think I understand what happened. Then explain it to me. The humans did everything. They maintained our stations. They healed our sick. They translated our languages. They kept the jump gates running. They did it for 40 years and we never noticed. We never thanked them. We never gave them a voice. And now they are gone, and we are discovering that we cannot survive without them. Veth was silent for a long moment. And we must bring them back, he said finally. They will not answer our messages. Their borders are closed. Then we go to them. We go to their border. We wait. We beg if we must. Veth stood slowly. He suddenly looked very old. I did not see them. For 40 years I looked past them like they were furniture, like they were machines. He walked to the window and stared at the stars. Perhaps that is why they left. Perhaps they finally grew tired of being invisible, outside the window. The lights of Pinnacle Station flickered again. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, a Velthari ship began its long journey towards Sol System, and on Earth, in a quiet room overlooking the ocean, Unipark watched the alien ship approaching on her screen. They're coming, Taiho said. Una nodded. Let them wait. For how long? Una thought of all the years she had waited. All the meetings where she had stood silently while the council ignored her. All the requests that had been denied. All the work that had been forgotten. Long enough to remember, she said. Long enough to understand? The alien ship reached the border of Sol System and stopped. It waited and waited and waited. 1 year had passed since the humans left. The galaxy was no longer the same. The Galactic Council, which had ruled known space for 10,000 years, was breaking apart. 3 species had already withdrawn. 2 more were threatening to leave. The Morvathi and the Exelians, who had been allies for centuries, were now bitter enemies. Their trade war had destroyed economies on a dozen worlds. The Asari had closed their borders completely. They trusted no one anymore. Without human diplomats to negotiate peace, old wounds had reopened. Old hatreds had returned. On Pinnacle Station, half the lights were dark. The air recyclers worked at 50% capacity. Entire sections had been sealed off because no one could maintain them, and on the Velthari homeworld, the plague had killed 200,000 people before it finally burned itself out. Counselor. Veth was no longer the proud leader he had once been. His robes hung loose on his thin frame. His white eyes had lost their shine. He spent his days reading reports of disaster and his nights staring at the silent stars. On the 11th day of his journey, his ship finally arrived at the border of Sol System. The border was marked by a line of small satellites, human machines, that floated silently in the darkness. Beyond them, Veth could see nothing. Sol System was hidden behind a screen of sensor jammers and stealth technology that even Velthari scientists could not penetrate. The humans had been busy during their 40 years as servants. They had learned everything. They had prepared for everything. They had planned this moment. Veth's ship stopped at the border and transmitted a message. It was simple. It was humble. This is Counselor Veth of the Velthari Empire. I request permission to speak with a representative of humanity. I come in peace. I come to listen. The message went into the darkness. No reply came. Veth waited one day, then 2, then 5. His crew grew restless. His advisors urged him to return home. There were problems that needed his attention. There were crises that demanded his presence. Veth refused to leave. I spent 40 years ignoring them, he said. I can spend 11 days waiting for them. On the 12th day, a single human ship appeared. It was small compared to Veth's Vessela, simple patrol craft with no weapons visible. But something about its design spoke of confidence. This was not a ship built to impress or intimidate. It was a ship built by people who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. A communication channel opened. A face appeared on Veth's screen. It was a human woman with gray hair and eyes that held neither anger nor joy. She looked at him the way a teacher might look at a student who had finally learned a painful lesson. Counselor Veth, the woman said. I am Captain Unipark. We met before, though I doubt you remember. Veth searched his memory. He had met many humans over the years. They had all blended together in his mind, short-lived creatures with strange hair and soft skin. Always busy, always working, always doing things that he never bothered to understand. I apologize, he said. I do not remember. No, Una said. You would not. You never looked at us long enough to remember our faces. She paused. I stood behind the observer chair in your council chamber for 6 years. I delivered reports. I made requests. I asked for humanity to be recognized as equals. Veth remembered now not the woman, but the chair. The small metal seat that faced the wall. The seat that he had walked past 1,000 times without ever wondering who sat in it. I remember the chair, he admitted. But not the person in it. No, not the person. Una nodded slowly. That is why we left, Counselor. Not because you denied our requests. Not because you refused us voting rights. We left because you never saw us at all. We were invisible to you. We fixed your stations and healed your sick and translated your languages and kept your gates running, and you looked right through us like we were ghosts. Veth lowered his head. In Velthari culture, this was a gesture of deep shame, something that a counselor never did before a lesser species. But Unipark was not a lesser species. She never had been. We were arrogant, Veth said. We were blind. We called ourselves the elder species, the wise ones, the builders of civilization. But we had forgotten how to build. We had forgotten how to heal. We had forgotten how to do anything except rule. He looked up at her. And when you left, we discovered that we could not even do that. Una was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, not warm, but no longer cold. What do you want, Counselor? I want you to come back. Why? Because the galaxy is falling apart. Because species that were friends are now enemies. Because diseases are spreading, and gates are failing, and stations are going dark. Because we need you. Una shook her head slowly. You needed us before. You needed us for 40 years. You just did not know it. I know it now. Do you? Una leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Tell me, Counselor, if we return, what will change? Will we still sit in chairs that face the wall? Will we still be denied a voice in decisions that affect us? Will we still be the invisible servants who keep your civilization running while you take all the credit? Veth opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. He thought about the question. He thought about it deeply, honestly, in a way he had never thought about anything before. I do not know, he finally said. I cannot promise that every species will change. I cannot promise that you will be treated as equals. The other counselors may refuse. The old ways may persist. He paused. But I can promise that I have changed. I will never forget what I have learned this year. I will never look past a human again. Eunice studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached into a pocket and pulled out a small device. She pressed a button, and a file transferred to Veth's ship. This is a database, she said. It contains a record of everything humanity built, fixed, and maintained for the galaxy over the past 40 years. Every system, every protocol, every repair, every act of service that was never recorded, never acknowledged, never thanked. Veth looked at the file. It was enormous, millions of entries, spanning decades of work. Study this, Eunice said. Learn to do it yourselves. Learn what we did. Learn what you lost. And then, Veth asked, will you return? Yuna's expression did not change. But something flickered in her eyes, something that might have been sadness, or hope, or both. We may return someday, she said, but not as servants, not as observers, not as ghosts that you look through without seeing. Then as what? As equals. Yuna sat back in her chair. Only as equals. That is our only condition, and it is not negotiable. The communication channel remained open for a moment longer. Veth wanted to say something more, to apologize again, to beg, to promise anything she wanted. But he understood that words were not enough. Words had never been enough. I will take your database to the council, he said. I will show them what we lost. I will fight for your recognition, even if it takes the rest of my life. Yuna nodded once. Then perhaps we will speak again, counselor. The channel closed. Her ship turned and flew back into the darkness of Sol System. Veth sat alone in his command chair for a long time, holding the database that contained 40 years of invisible work. Then he ordered his ship to return home. He had much to learn, and much to teach. 10 years had passed since Counselor Veth turned from the human border. The galaxy had changed. 3 species had collapsed entirely during the hard years. Their civilizations crumbled under the weight of problems they could no longer solve. Some of their people scattered across the stars, refugees searching for new homes. Others vanished into history, remembered only in old records and abandoned stations. But other species had learned. The new Galactic Council was smaller, now only 7 members instead of 12. They met in a different hall, one without thrones carved from distant stones. Their chairs were simple and equal. They sat in a circle where everyone could see everyone else's face. There was no chair that faced the wall. Young Velthari engineers studied the manuals that humans had left behind. They learned to read Korean. They learned to understand the strange symbols and measurements that humans used. Slowly, painfully. They learned to maintain the machines that had been mysteries for centuries. On the Morvathi homeworld, medical schools taught human surgical techniques. Students watched old recordings of Dr. Hannah Shin performing operations, pausing and rewinding to catch every movement of her skilled hands. The recordings had no sound. Humans had never thought to add narration, because no one had ever asked them to explain what they were doing, but the students learned. Anyway, a new generation of diplomats practiced. Something called empathy was a human word that had no exact translation. In most alien languages, the closest meaning was feeling what others feel. It seemed simple. It was not. The Galactic Council had tried to contact humanity many times over the years. They sent messages. They sent gifts. They sent formal invitations and humble apologies. Sol system, remained silent. But the humans were not idle behind their closed borders in the years of solitude. Humanity had built wonders that no alien eye had ever seen. New ships that moved faster than anything in the galaxy, new stations that floated in the clouds of gas giants, new art and music and stories that celebrated what it meant to be human. They had also watched. Human sensors monitored every system, every planet, every ship in the galaxy. They saw the collapse. They saw the suffering. They saw species learning lessons that should have been learned centuries ago, and they saw the change. Admiral Zhu Han was 83 years old now. Her hair was white as snow, and she moved slowly with the help of a cane. But her mind was sharp, and her eyes still held the same fire that had burned when she authorized Protocol Horizon. She sat in a garden in Busan. On the coast of Korea, the sea stretched before her, endless and gray. The same sea that her ancestors had sailed for thousands of years. Above her, human ships moved silently through the sky protectors of a world that had learned to protect itself. A young officer approached her. His name was Sun Wu Li, and he was one of the new generation born after the withdrawal. Raised in a humanity that stood alone, Admiral Sun Wu said, "The Galactic Council has sent another message." Ji Wu did not look up from the sea. "Read it to me." Sun Wu opened his datapad. "They are offering humanity a founding seat on the Council. Full voting rights. Equal status with all member species. Official recognition of all past contributions." He paused. "In a formal apology to be broadcast across every system in the galaxy." Gu was silent for a moment. A wave crashed against the shore. A bird called in the distance. "What do you think, Sun Wu?" she asked. The young man hesitated. He had grown up hearing stories about the elder species, how they had ignored humanity, dismissed humanity, treated humanity as servants. He had been taught to be proud of what his people had done, how they had walked away with dignity and rebuilt their civilization alone. But he had also learned something else in his years of training. He had learned that strength was not the same as isolation, that pride was not the same as loneliness, that even the strongest people needed others. "I think they have changed," he said slowly. "I have studied their records. I have watched their progress. They have learned to do the things we used to do for them. They have learned humility. They have learned to see others." He paused. "I think they finally understand." Gu nodded slowly. "Understanding is the first step. But trust is not built in a single moment. Trust is built slowly over years, through actions that match words. So what should I tell them?" Ji Wu finally turned away from the sea. She looked at Sun Wu with eyes that had seen too many betrayals, too many disappointments, too many promises broken. But there was also something else in those eyes, something that might have been hope. "Tell them we will consider it," she said. "In another 10 years?" Sun Wu's eyes widened. 10 years, Admiral? They have waited so long already. They made us wait 40. Ji Wu smiled a tired, knowing smile that held no bitterness, only truth. They can learn patience, too. It is one of the most important lessons. Sun Wu hesitated, then bowed his head in respect. "I will send the message, Admiral." He turned and walked away, leaving Ji Wu alone with the sea. She sat for a long time, watching the waves. The sun moved across the sky. The ships passed overhead. The world continued to turn. 40 years ago, Ji Wu had been a young officer on Pinnacle Station. She had watched her people work without thanks. She had watched them serve without recognition. She had watched them give and give and give. Receiving nothing in return, she had sworn that it would not last forever, and it had not. Now, for the first time in galactic history, humanity held all the power, not because they had conquered anyone, not because they had threatened or demanded or forced. They held power because they had walked away, because they had shown the galaxy what it was like to lose something that no one had ever valued, the silence of soul. The system was louder than any weapon. The closed borders were stronger than any army, and the patience the endless. Quiet, human patience was the greatest strength of all. In the garden, Ji Wu closed her eyes. She thought of Una Park, who had stood in that small metal chair for 6 years. She thought of Mingi Cho, who had fixed the translators in the middle of the night. She thought of Junho Beek and Hannah Shin, and all the others who had given their lives to a galaxy that never noticed. "We will return," she whispered to the wind. "Someday, when they have truly earned it. When they see us not as servants, not as helpers, not as the young ones who fix things." She opened her eyes and looked at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. "We will return as equals. And then, perhaps, we will build something better together." Far across the galaxy, on a rebuilt Pinnacle station, Counselor Vettold, now near the end of his long life, received humanity's response. 10 more years. More waiting. More patience. He read the message 3 times. Then he set it down gently and looked out at the stars. "Fair enough," he said quietly to the empty room. Fair enough. He had waited 10 years already. He could wait 10 more, and somewhere in the silence between stars, in the vast darkness where no one could see, humanity waited too, not as servants, not as ghosts, not as invisible workers who kept the galaxy running without thanks. They waited as equals, and that made all the difference.